Okay, welcome to episode 3 on Solo Dad Smiling, Taboo Topics That Matter to Parents. This is Scott Carr, your host of the show, where I'm going to help you become more informed and inspired through engaging on some crucial topics that truly matter to parents. And specifically, if reducing drama in your home, creating better work-life parenting balance, or becoming more important to your child than their phone are areas that you're interested in learning more about, then be sure to stick with us here for this lively episode through its entirety. My warm welcome to you for joining us here on episode 3 with Dr JP Pawliw, where we're going to dive deep into the keys behind parenting under pressure. I certainly appreciate you joining us today, and I encourage you again to stick around from start to finish because you're not going to want to miss any of this super valuable, totally relevant content that's dedicated to modern parents figuring it all out. And I have a special gift for you at the end as well, and I'd like you to be encouraged to stick around and earn that. Now, before I introduce today's special guest, who happens to be an old friend of mine, I just want to briefly connect to you on the motivation for creating this show. Solo Dad Smiling really came about as a result of my experience in raising 3 daughters solo, and more specifically, the fact that I became smart enough to realize that if I let go of my fears and allowed my daughters in some ways to raise me, that everything was just going to work out fine. So this meant parking my ego at the door. It meant learning to get out of the way. I'm just saying nothing and letting moments pass, finding a way to gather my balance, and also finding a way in today's society to slow down and to connect with my daughters in ways that didn't involve outside activities or sports. So again, if you are looking for some strategies to learn how to get out of the way yourself, be sure to stick around for the next 40 minutes or so, and I'll help you start that process. Now, on to today's episode. I know that you're here to hear from Dr. JP Pawliw. I'm proud to introduce you to him. He is a friend of mine from Burlington, Ontario, and before he became an international expert and a thought leader on leadership, performance, and managing under pressure, I actually always had a sense that he would scale great heights, just a spidey sense that I had back in high school. What you need to know, though, is that JP is one of the highest rated lecturers at the prestigious Kellogg School Management's Executive Education program. JP formerly taught executive education both at Kellogg Graduate School and also Queen's University Executive Development Center. He now acts as an advisor to numerous Fortune 100 companies, including long-term relationships with Johnson & Johnson, HSBC, as well as professional sports teams, military, and some Olympic medal-winning athletes. And JP's training, some of it, comes from Harvard Medical School's Mind-Body Medical Institute. JP speaks around the globe on 5 continents, helping people improve their overall performance. And now, he's in Toronto. He's going to join us here in a minute, and I'll tell you that he's a contributing member of the Institute for Health and Human Performance Research Team, a group that attempts to bring rigor to understanding what allows some leaders, individuals, and organizations to perform more effectively under pressure or to drive meaningful results. And that means JP helps people, including parents today, learn how they can be their best when it matters the most. And JP, I'll let you know, is a proud father to Bridget, who's 19, Grace, 17, and Wes, who's 14, and we're going to make a connection to parenting under pressure today. JP, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Scott. Thank you so much. By the way, I love the intro around how to get out of the way. I think I need that coaching as much as anyone.
It's tough, isn't it? You know, kids do what we do, not what we say, and we get programmed a certain way, don't we? Before we get into the questions here that folks are waiting to, really engage with and hear about, is there anything to add on your own parenting journey in terms of how it's related to human performance and whatnot? Anything to prime us up with before we get going?
Yeah, probably just this, that it's kind of curious that, the work I do right now is really around leadership development. So we work with organizations, helping them lead more effectively under pressure. That's what we do. We do research on that, we train on that, we coach on that. But what I find very interesting is when we work with big organizations, they absolutely want this for their leaders, which is great. But when we bring up any of how this work affects them personally, with their spouses, partners, with their kids, it grabs them, it gains more traction. And so, I just remember this one time worked with Goldman Sachs in New York, and before the program, was our first program with him like 10 years ago. And I said, to what degree on the pre-call, 2 weeks ahead, I said, to what degree do you want me to also talk about all of this as it relates to personal, not just work? He said, no, these are busy people. They don't have time. Okay, that's fine. So we didn't. But we had a 20-minute scheduled 20-minute Q&A afterwards. And of course, every question in the 20-minute Q&A, which by the way became 45-minute Q&A, was all around, I have a 16-year-old daughter and I've got the 17-year-old son and I'm challenged by this, and does this work at home? And I mean, it was amazing to me. And so I guess what I'm saying is we're going to get into this obviously more around, parenting, but my goodness, the same skills that I think we're going to talk about here, and I know definitely you talk about, Scott, are skills that organizations and leaders and managers under pressure also, utilize and need in order to be effective.
Fantastic. Yeah, I have a sense that runs deep, and our families do shape us, don't they? We shape them, and they shape us, how we show up for work, how high-performing we can become, and there's some real synchronicity there, and I've discovered that as well. It's part of my journey and part of my story. JP, firstly, why do you think coaching your children is really so important? What's your feeling about that?
Wow, that's a great question. So, I mean, there's so many ways to answer. Let's take a neuroscientific, kind of a neuroscience point of view, which I know you're very familiar with. But for those who are listening in a sense, the brain, kind of, is built and over time, we have two parts of the brain: the emotional part of our brain, a little deeper, called the amygdala, the limbic system, where we feel, and then we have this kind of overlay part. You can almost think of it almost like a fist, really. And inside is the thumb, which is the emotional part of our brain, and on the outside is the prefrontal cortex, like really above the eyes, behind the forehead. The reason I'm talking about this is that it's really not until about age, depending on the person, 24, 25, that this kind of frontal area, prefrontal cortex, which is kind of our executive function area, which is the one that calms the amygdala, calms the emotional part of our brain, helps us plan, helps us be a bit more rational in our decision making. It's really not until early to mid-20s that develops. And the reason I'm saying all this is that this is why teens are more susceptible to kind of fly off the hook, be a bit more risk tolerant than we would like them to be. And so in some ways, come back all the way to your question, the reason we want to coach is because in some ways we can think that we are, as parents, our role is almost to be their left, in this case, left prefrontal cortex, the fingers part, because that's the part that helps inhibit the amygdala. And so we do that both in our coaching, in our modeling, and what we're trying to do is help them kind of develop that part of their brain. And it most definitely is developing right around, from 0 to 2024. But so in some ways, the coaching part to me is all about trying to kind of shape, sounds too manipulative, but help influence in a positive way that front prefrontal cortex. And there's many other reasons, but I'll just stop there because I know there's other questions.
No, absolutely. That's brilliant. And before we talk about what it's like to parent teens and our degree of happiness with that, is it safe to say that if parents aren't operating more or less from their prefrontal cortex, if we're not operating from the logical executive part of our brain, then we ourselves can bring more emotion and conflict into our own homes? Is that a fair assessment?
Oh my gosh. Great question. Because really, let's be clear. That first part that I talked about, throw it away if we can't work out of the, that front prefrontal cortex. So you're absolutely right, Scott. And I think, it's amazing because in my family, we're a separated family, and all my kids are very precocious in a lot of the things that they do, but our middle child, Grace, has this real kind of ability to kind of give me really good feedback when I'm not acting out of, working out of that place. of the prefrontal cortex. And not always, by the way, it's not always, not to say it's not welcomed. It's definitely welcomed. Maybe not in the moment, but later it is. But it's not always comfortable, let's say. But my goodness, that has been great learning for me. And I'm certainly no master at it. As I think, it's really important for everyone who's listening to this to know, as parents, we will not be perfect. We absolutely will not be perfect. And I think almost one of the biggest ways that we can kind of shape and influence and coach our young people is to be able to not be afraid to admit the mistake. And there's a number of reasons for that. Number one is because kids, when there's an issue, conflict, they will naturally, even though on the outside it doesn't appear this way, especially with teens, they will naturally blame themselves. Now, it doesn't appear, it looks like they're blaming us and it gets us triggered, but really they're kind of, they're really doing something wrong. And so in some ways, us admitting a mistake, when it's a true mistake, helps them kind of realize, it's not me, which is really important. But number two, we're modeling to them, again, that it's okay to admit a mistake. It's okay to kind of be vulnerable. And actually, we also know from the research that when we're vulnerable, that's what allows another individual, by the way, teen, child, younger child, spouse, partner, or anyone else, when we're not afraid to be vulnerable, that's what allows other people to connect more intimately with us. When they feel that more intimate connection, my goodness, so many good things come from that. The chemicals that bathe their brain when they feel connected is such a driver of their ability to be calm in the midst of, the ups and downs, not just in this moment conversation, but in all of life. Because as you know, kids face a lot of pressure today. And so if we can help bathe them in these good chemicals, that's going to put them in a position over time to be able to self-soothe when they're in pressure situations.
Well, okay, sure. That's wonderful. I guess that's a good sign. And Ellie, my 9-year-old last year, was emptying the dishwasher, and she left a voicemail on my phone suggesting that she had dropped 2 mugs and broken them, and that she was opening up conversation and taking ownership for that and asking me if that was okay. I guess I should take that as a really as a good sign that I have that kind of communication.
I would say that is just like as good a sign as you can get, to be honest, Scott. It's because it says so many things, everything I just talked about, but also says that there's a safety that they feel. And when our kids feel safe, that really matters. Scott, remind me of your kids' ages again, because I met them, but how old are they now?
They're 13, 10, and 8, 3 daughters.
Right. So right, it's 13. So, I think, your 13 is getting there, but, I'm a few years ahead of you, 19, 17, 14. And when kids feel safe with us, when we built that kind of platform of connection, they will share with us what's going on. And and I know that there's a lot of mental health issues with young people today. There's a lot of potentially catastrophic behaviors they can engage in. And when I say behavior, I don't mean, I mean saying yes and getting in a car when someone's drinking. And so I'm a little ahead of you are, because, your 13-year-old's not there clearly yet. But boy, when they can say that to you or to me, to any of us as parents, that safety is there, that can be difference making between them calling you and saying, hey, Dad, somebody's drinking. I don't want to get in the car. Can you pick me up? Even though they're past curfew and they know they're kind of in trouble, but they still feel safe enough to do that. Like, I think for anyone listening, this is huge. Like, this is absolutely huge. Because I remember in high school, there were a few times, Scott and I went to the same high school, which is so bizarre now to think of it. But I remember a few times, we're leaving a party and, not all of us can drive. I was a late comer to driving. I didn't get my license till later than most. So I rely on other friends. And, you're like, are they drinking? Well, they say they didn't. And you're kind of not sure. And you kind of, because we don't have that, prefrontal cortex, we kind of say sure. And look, I was fortunate enough never to get into trouble. I mean, in terms of being in someone's car and getting a car accident, But my gosh, it sure could have happened, right? And so we want to create that safety so they can say to us, hey, Mom, hey, Scott, hey, Dad, I need you to pick me up. And I know I'm past curfew. I know you might be mad at me, but I need this right now.
Wonderful. That's wonderful. And fantastic information, really helpful. And I know that there's some folks listening here that have children that aren't tweens or aren't teens. And so when we talk about the stress around parenting teens and how enjoyable or unenjoyable that can be for people, some people might be saying, boy, I mean, it's tougher than when they're 5 and 6 years old. So just to preface this next question, is it really true, JP, that parents are most unhappy in their lives while they're parenting their teens? Has that been your experience?
All right, can everyone see what I'm doing? This is called a sine wave. I'll do it one more time. High, low, and high again. Okay, this is when we first meet our partners. This is when we're in our 20s and we're pretty happy. And when we have kids, and when they become, and follow my line, when they become teenagers is when we get to the bottom. When we're 47 years old is our unhappiest time in our lives when we're in a parenting capacity. And then after they leave, it becomes better. And there's no question. The data is pretty clear on this. This is the hardest time. By the way, this is when a lot of couples break up. It's when Elizabeth and I broke up. And I think that, for a lot of couples or individuals who are watching this now, I think it's important to norm this, which is to say, no, you're not alone, right? You're not alone. It is hard. It's acutely hard. When you're at the bottom on that sine wave, when you have teenage kids and they're treating you, like, excuse my language, like crap. And you feel like you're doing all this stuff for them and it just feels like, they're treating you so poorly. And so that's why we need specific tools. And, let me offer one now that I think is one of the most, powerful from our leadership development, which is that because of the way the brain works, the way we function, we kind of handle information, when we're in a pressure moment with our teens or with our younger ones, it could be either, but let's say teens because we're talking about that. Because of the way the brain works, and I won't go into too much, but we feel before we think. Emotion comes before thought. Okay, so that's important as a kind of a pillar. We feel before we think. Emotion comes before thought. So my teen comes in to the door, after school, and she's at high school. She's working hard to get good marks, and she's an introvert and gets overwhelmed by all the kids. She comes in and she, let's say, treats me really poorly when she comes in the door. And I'm kind of like, I made cookies or I did this, and maybe I didn't, but I'm doing all these things to be a good dad, or at least in my mind, a good dad. And she treats me poorly. And here's what can happen in that moment if we're not careful. Here's the trap that I want everyone to really pay attention to. We can confuse what we call impact for intent. So Bridget or Gracie or Wes can come into the door, say something. And because of the way my brain works and I handle information, I will feel before I think. So if they're being a bit rude, it'll impact me. I'll feel that before I can really think about it with that, front part of the brain. And then I confuse that feeling, that impact, for their actual intention. For intention. Now, is it really their intention that they're treating me this poorly or whatever? Or are they just having a bad time, bad day? And they need to blow off steam at someone they know will love them no matter what. And so this is really important for parents. And by the way, again, I'm not perfect at this. I struggle with this at times, especially when I'm kind of what we call in a halted state. So here's a second little concrete skill. When I'm in a halted state, HALT, when I'm hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. So I just flew back from somewhere and, and I'm excited to see them, but I'm a bit halted. And, one of them comes in and really kind of feels disrespectful. I'm really at risk, as anyone is, to then get triggered because I'm confusing the impact for their intention. And so I would say one of the big things for all of us as parents is to remember, is that really their intention, right? Because we judge ourselves based on our good intention, but we judge others based on their impact. So if we can get past the impact to their intention, assume positive intention, and then go have a conversation to talk about it, not in that moment, but when they calm down, it'll help us get to their intention. And I think it's a really big one for me. I feel like that's some of my work that I'm really trying to work on because, you go through and you're, working hard, doing all these things. And from my in my provider role, it's kind of like I'm trying to be a good dad and do the things that I think are the things that are being a good dad, providing, doing whatever. And, you know, and I think that's good and worthy and all the rest. And sometimes, you know what? Our kids just need us to be there, not react, and then later go and talk to them and have that kind of conversation to say, hey, you know, here's the impact you had. I'm sure it wasn't your intention. Can we talk about it? And so how we deal with it, oh my gosh, you know, like that really is how we can be the best parent. Like, yes, provide, of course. But this other piece, the social emotional piece, it's huge. And which is why I really value the work you're doing, Scott, because I feel like this is stuff that we don't learn as much today. You know, most of us don't go to church, so to speak. We don't have places where we can learn. In fact, the last 10 years with TED Talks and everything and the new neuroscience of behavior that's really come on has been a great value. But it requires skill development, quite frankly.
Sure, and we're learning all that by reading and watching. You know that there's a difference between learning and knowing and being. And I think that's what you're talking about. I think they're tired of knowing, and most people want to be. They want to be in control in those moments. And I suppose that we could continue this train of the thought for another minute by saying that we really need to think differently around some of the solutions. So perhaps we could be safe to say that we could encourage anyone listening to just try a different way of thinking with a scenario that's a particular pinch at home with them. Try a different strategy. Try not to feel the impact of it before you understand the intention. Might be safe to say, like, you know, whatever curfews or homework, or the phone, the device, a different strategy here.
I think you're right. And I think a big one is to remember that in that moment when they're triggering or you're triggering, we have trouble hearing each other. And in fact, there's a chemical that mediates this reaction, which is cortisol. And when cortisol is kind of circulating our brain, our body, you know, we're not at our best. They're not going to be at their best, which is why that, you know, at times we need to take that time out, take an 18-minute break. And it doesn't always have to be 18 minutes, but just enough that we can kind of calm down. And so when that, you know, Grace or Bridge comes in and they're kind of, I'm trying to really learn to say, okay, you know what, and they're very good at communicating their needs, by the way, but they need an 18-minute break before when I can say, hey, you know, because sometimes, you know, I can be like, what the heck, you know, like, that's no way to treat anyone, let alone your dad, you know, but that's not the right way to go about it. So that 18-minute pause, I think, really does matter, which is, I think, what you're suggesting.
Okay, brilliant. And let's tie this a little bit more into how parents are. I mean, you're seeing leaders in different parts of the world that lead organizations or companies or groups, teams, and yet some of them are parents. And, you know, what kind of pressures now are unique? And how do these, you know, whatever we're doing in our jobs, in our lives, I guess it's fair to say, how is it that we can coach our children effectively up to them when we're under so much pressure ourselves as parents? Are there any strategies that you have for parents to be able to work with?
Yeah, and do you mean on the self-management side as a parent or as we coach? Which one?
Fair enough. I think more on the self-management side. So, you know, we've got devices, we've got emails coming in at all times. We've got want to check. How do we manage our own lives for our children?
Yeah, you know, Scott, great question. Well, there's a number of things for sure. And, you know, the first part is to know that there are skills, concrete skills you can learn, right? So that's kind of really important to know. That's learnable, number one. Number two, we know, I'll give one example that is just like a no-brainer, but it takes time. If you mindfully meditate for 10 minutes a day, and of course I'm going to suggest you do it for longer, but if you just do it for 10 minutes a day, the accumulation of doing some mindfulness, 10 minutes a day, we now know from Sarah Lazar's work at Harvard, increases the power of these fingers, that, you know, that front part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, to calm that amygdala. And it's like, so it's almost like before we get into these pressure moments, we can do mindfulness, and that's going to help us when we're in the pressure moment. So that's one that's just like a no-brainer. I think another one is that, you know, that being self-aware around being halted, HALT, hungry, angry, lonely, tired. I'll mention that again because that's kind of now a bit more in the moment. I think the other one that I might suggest is that, and it kind of fits with what we've talked about around impact on and intent, is that we can jump to judgment 5% of available information. We do that to protect ourselves, right? 2,000 years ago, we'd get eaten if we waited around for 6 and 10 and 20% of available information. So we've kind of been designed to amplify the negative, jump to judgment to protect ourselves. But we're not going to get eaten today. So now we have to kind of overrule that 5% rule of jumping to judgment. And so I would say this kind of final technique, we call it SOS. And we help with the U.S. Navy when we were doing a bunch of work with them over the last 12 years. And here's the SOS. Just know that, okay, with everything we've talked about, they come in, there's a bit of conflict. I can jump to judgment based on less than 5%. I can confuse impact for intent. I might be halted. All of these things, SOS is just stop. Just know that whatever you're doing in this moment, you're probably not using all of your cognitive resources that you probably can. So number one is stop. Number two, S-O is oxygenate. Take that breath right down to your toes. And if you're mindfully meditating during the mornings and you're building up your left prefrontal cortex, when you take a breath, you've got an in-the-moment strategy, so that we know will calm the amygdala. And then it's the final S, which is seek information. Get more than 5%. Stop, oxygenate, seek information. And the seek information is to ask questions. Now, why do we ask questions? We ask questions to get more than 5%, but also we know that when you ask a young person or anyone questions, it stimulates, again, their left prefrontal cortex to calm their amygdala, which helps develop it over time, but it also helps them kind of see a bit more effectively. So there's a number, and as everyone can see just in my description here, there's a lot going on. There's layers going on for us and for them. It's a dance. It's a difficult art. There's a huge science here, but there's an art. And so know that it's going to take time to build these concrete skills. Know that you're not alone in building these and it's hard. Know that you will react and you will make a mistake. And that's when that final piece around that admitted mistake is so darn important.
Excellent. I'm going to bring a question in a moment from AJ to you, JP. So hang in there, AJ, and I'm going to get that question out and read it and make it clear for him. And AJ, JP, I wanted to just build on the 5% that you talked about with respect to in our own conflicts with partner, spouse, or our own conflicts with children, or coming to judgments, or the stresses that we're causing around, as I like to work with people, around the situations, the circumstances that we cannot control. Are you suggesting that the 5% of information, or that a lot of the stress in our households are caused by this rush to judgment, and that we're working on 5% of the full information, and that's where conflict comes from?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's one of the layers and one of the factors, and I think there's many factors, but most definitely, it's almost like what we're talking about is like the operating system of our brain that we want to kind of manage and get more effective at, because if we can be better at managing this and jumping to judgment, trying to get more than 5%, all of these things, like if we can manage our operating system, it means then we can use different software that's going to help us. For instance, conflict, right? How do we deal with conflict? Well, if we're managing this operating system, then we can start to do some things that are really important around conflict, which is not to get into feeling contempt for the other person. So if we move away from kids for a minute with our partners and spouses and, significant others, and in the book I talk about in the very first chapter around how important it is to air grievances skillfully in terms of how, the prediction that you can make of a couple staying together 5 years from today. And it's based on one, quality, which is how skillfully we air our grievances, how we manage everything we're talking about here, and how we air our grievances skillfully. And so, one of the big traps is to fall into kind of contempt, and contempt is the single worst of all of them. And so, to kind of answer your question, conflict in a household, I think, is operating system stuff, and then it's kind of managing the more than the 5% to not jump to judgment, to not get into contempt and criticism, and some of those pieces that can really start to pull apart a relationship, either with significant other or with kids. And so I think there's a in my opinion, there's a lot of things in the research. I'm more speaking from the research. There are a lot of things.
Sure, brilliant. That's great. And I see we have some more viewers here, so that's good. We're just going to get into some Q&A here before we wrap. Anyhow, JP, and I'll tell folks about my offer and how they can connect with me at the Empowered Parents Network. But one question that AJ has with respect to the SOS that you mentioned, and do you feel that he would like to know that, if he's going to use an SOS strategy with his daughter, could be his 5-year-old or his 3.5-year-old, what would his body language look like, or his facial expression look like when he's using SOS? Would that also help him communicate effectively, that strategy?
Yeah. Well, I'll say this for AJ and Scott, for you, there's too many acronyms here, hey? You called me JP earlier, or him AJ, whatever, which actually is correct in this case. But AJ, I think that's a great question. And I'm going to say I'm going to offer another strategy for kind of that age that I think is really powerful. But I'm going to answer your question first, which is, kids are, they've got their antennae out. And so your point about being mindful of our face expression is huge. And I would add a second one there, is to lower yourself so you're at the same level. Because even when you're slightly, and we're obviously a lot bigger than 3 and 5-year-olds, that can put them in a place where now they're a bit triggered, even though we're not saying anything, even though our facial expression might be great. So to bring ourselves lower down, I think that's a really important one. On our knees, eye to eye. I think facial expression is important, and I feel like actually, this is where I, again, can improve. Is I sometimes don't know what my face is saying. And sometimes it can be stronger than what I'm feeling. And so actually, again, Grace is so good at this. She's like, Dad, why are you so strong? And I'm like, ooh, I don't even feel strong, but I am. And I'm an intense person. Scott, you know that from, 40 years ago, right? So I'm an intense person. I got to be careful on this one, right? So that's
30
the
years
first. Yeah, okay, 30, better, 30 years ago. So I think one thing is facial expression, and really try, because emotions are infectious. So we really want to kind of, practice that. And by the way, one of the best ways we can do that is to feel some gratitude for our kids. And that's a way that actually changes our facial expression. And we don't even know it. So that's a great little tip. But here's the other one, AJ, and this is for everyone. And by the way, this can help with any relationship, but with kids kind of under 10, it's especially important. We call it the 3 L's. And it's actually part of our coaching program that we do in leadership development, with organizations, but this is for parents, the 3 L's, which is in that moment when your little one is upset, they don't want to leave a party. We had our birthday party, everyone's leaving, they don't want to leave. And so they start to act up, right? And in that moment, as parents, we can start to feel a bit socially judged, what we call social appraisal. People are watching us as a parent. And so we can get a bit hijacked and a bit triggered, and we're kind of not sure what to do. And so we can sometimes fall into one of two ways. We can kind of just give in so they don't scream and don't embarrass us. Or at one point we can just kind of grab them and go, And the problem with both of those is that, yeah, they might kind of minimize how we're viewed in the moment, but they don't do anything for coaching for a young person. Because really what's going on is that young person is feeling something. And so the 3 L's is really about tuning in. It's really an empathy tool, but it's a way to coach and tune into the little one. And the 3 L's are this: listen, to really just listen and act as that kind of translator. So, if, I think of Wes as a 3 or 5-year-old, he doesn't want to leave a party, I'd say, oh, Wes, I'm listening, ask him questions, and I'm trying to put words to how he's feeling. And what I'm doing is I'm trying to create some sophistication for him for the emotions, the sensations he's feeling, and words, so he becomes more literate, emotionally literate. And so it's like, oh, Wes, you're feeling frustrated. You don't want to leave. You're having fun, aren't you? You're having a good time, aren't you? And so I'm listening, asking him questions, but then I'm translating back how he's feeling. So he's growing. So he feels like he has a voice, but he's also getting that longer term sophistication and literacy. Okay, number one. So listen. And then I want to, listen. And the second L is label. So the label is the translating. So I'm labeling back what he's feeling. So listen, label it back so that he's gaining all the things I just mentioned. But the third L is then look for solutions. So Wes, I know you don't want to go. The party is over. What could we do you think? Oh, you want to stay for 2 more, he doesn't want to stay for 2 more minutes. He wants to stay for 2 more hours. I know you want to stay for 2 more hours, but what if we stay for 2 more minutes or 10 more minutes or 5 more minutes or, or whatever it is, whatever the look for solution is, at some point, we just have to do what we have to do. And then it's like, Wes, I know you want to stay, labeling again, but now we're going to have to leave. And then to be okay as a parent that your kids are going to scream and people aren't really judging you. They're actually feeling more empathy for you if you, really want to know. But to me, this 3 L's is like so critical, both in the moment, giving them voice and giving them some labels, but in the long term, they grow this emotional literacy that is so very important. So that when they get to 12 and 13 and 14, during changes, they have more understanding of what this body, what's going on in this body, in these emotions. And now I can kind of tune into myself. We know that from the research. It actually helps them when they're, especially around puberty, kind of self-soothe that much better.
Wonderful. And I just think it's worth thinking there with this idea that they're given a voice, and it's almost as if you are guiding the solution, and maybe it's an alternative. I know that's worked for me in the past. Sometimes they might want to just be able to spend some time taking a walk. Maybe they're tired from the party or the activity, and truly they do want to leave, but emotionally, or for whatever reason, they want to be there. And I think that what I've been able to do pretty well is just sort of read that and present an alternative to them. So I think that's what you're talking about. It gives them a voice, it solves the problem, and we move on, and we're modeling good parenting for other people that might have been judging us.
Well, I mean, that's true too. And by the way, I think that last point's a good one, is, to try to see if you can give them some choice, even though, it's kind of a minor choice, but it's like, do you want to do this, or do you want to do that, but it's still in the leaving. Like, I mean, so there's a bit of choice. They have a bit of control. I think that's another great point, Scott, that needs to be added to that third part, which I kind of forgot to mention.
Last question for you, and then we'll wrap up. And I just think it has to do with your own kids in terms of their ages and their genders. You find now that with Bridget being 19, are you consciously able to? Because this is another factor that we have, isn't it, in our society, is we're all battling how much to involve ourselves in the decisions that they're making and in their lives. And I know you and she have had lots to talk about over her whole life in the last year or two. But do you find that you're maybe starting to parent her differently than you would say Wes, who's 14? Do you see a difference in that?
No, you know why? No, because Wes is like 25 years old already, actually. He is so, oh my gosh, he's like such a unique individual. But to get back to your point, has it changed how I'm coaching and working with Bridget, as a parent at 19 versus when she was 13 or 14 or 15 or 16? Absolutely, which is, I think, your point. And what's beautiful, and this is what I do want to say, I'm 50, by the way, in a month, Scott. But I'm kind of now going back up the side of maybe a little bit more happiness, maybe, in our sine wave. And I think part of that is now I'm really developing a different relationship with Bridget, and even Gracie, because again, she's fairly precocious emotionally. But I think that it actually becomes, oh my gosh, it becomes so sweet, because I mean, I feel like I'm learning from them. It's a different relationship. It's more like an adult peer relationship. So for all the parents out there, maybe, AJ 3.5, 5-year-olds, that you're a little ways away, but for you, Scott, and for anyone else with kids in that tweener, early teens, it really does get better. It's hard, but boy, it gets better. And it's just, the fruit is just delicious. Like the conversations, you know, dropping her off at university and having these conversations about, you know, we listened to Barack Obama's Dreams for My Father audio was actually speaking. It's just like this shared memory and this discussion, and she's reading stuff that's way beyond anything I've read, and I'm like learning from her and being challenged. It's so lovely, but it's hard to get there.
It is. Well, listen, AJ, JP, of course. AJ is still with us, as are others. Great to spend this time with you today. Really insightful around, again, how I think it does fall into how I do like to work with parents and inspire them to be more connected to their prefrontal cortex and have awareness around their own emotions, beginning to work more through logic at work, at home. I think that's very valid for everybody on the call today. And this has been miraculous. I mean, you've got maybe 1 minute to wrap up your thoughts here. What do you think? I mean, what's one last piece of encouragement? You know, laugh more, cry more, be vulnerable, I think, is something you mentioned today that is very important for parents to recall, isn't it? It's probably different than how you and I were raised. Oh,
very much so. Very much. By the way, what I love is, and I don't know how well you know my parents. My parents are still alive. I was just in Burlington with them on Sunday, actually on Monday as well. And it's actually quite lovely how my father, my mom was already there, but how my father has kind of changed a little bit and is a little softer, a little more vulnerable in his own way. Yes, our parents were different, and yet they're changing still, which is lovely. But to come back to your question, which I think is a good one, is something I really learned from Elizabeth, my ex, which is just to relax. Like, the kids are going to be okay. Oh my God. I just need to hear that. Just relax. They're going to be okay, and just, love them and love them unconditionally, and they're going to be okay. And I think really, and I kind of hope that I am learning to do that or doing that, because I think that is a really big one. When their center is strong, they can do a lot of stuff. And that's, I think, what we really want to do is help build that center. So that's probably what I would finish on.
Well, I know if you want to get in touch with JP directly and find out more about him as a speaker and a researcher, you can go to ihhp.com. Is that correct? Just correct me on your website, JP.
Yeah, so there's two ways to get to it. One is, because of the book that just came out, you can go to pressurebook.com. That's easier to remember. But the one that you're talking about is ihhp.com, which is Institute for Health and Human Potential, but it's ihhp.com.
Wonderful. Well, that's it. Thanks so much for joining us today. It's been great to interact with you, and thanks so much. Wishing you well with everything and your travel schedule that's upcoming, and great luck with all your children. I know I'll be in touch with you. And so thanks.
Great.
And
thank you, Scott. Thank you, everyone. Absolutely.
Wonderful. And before we close, I did want to mention to folks that if they want to reach me directly, they can do so at scott@beliefTrumpsTalent.com. You want to learn some free strategies. I'm very happy to work with anyone that would contact me there, looking for 30 minutes of free strategies to reduce conflict in your home, achieve real life parenting balance, and find a way to become more important to your child than their phone. I have a 13-year-old who is very conversant with her iPhone, and so this is some of the work that we're doing, and feel free to contact me there, scott@beliefTrumpsTalent.com. JP and everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been really wonderful and meaningful. Have a wonderful day. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, Scott.